Hello and welcome to Rarely Reading, the segment we've been alluding to for the last 6 months.
It's finally here. You've all been waiting.
It's finally arrived. We finally finished our books because
Right.
we're very, very lazy, and hence the title, We Rarely Read.
Yes.
So, kick us off, Emmett.
Yeah, so we both read nonfiction,
Yes.
which is, I know that's more what I'm geared to, actually. I do read fiction, but I read, like, the smaller fiction. If anything is, like, I don't know. Anything is too long, I lose interest real quick.
110%. Yeah, I usually, when I do read, once in a while I will read fiction if it's like Bret Easton Ellis.
Yeah.
He's one of my favorite authors, and he did like American Psycho, Less Than Zero. I like that kind of stuff, but it's kind of like rooted in the real world and gritty. But most of the time when I rarely do read, it's usually a biography, usually like a rock star or an actor or director or something like that. Or like I read like a survival book, like, but it's all stuff that's like more rooted in the real world.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and this one in a way is a biography that I read, and you as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of a different approach to a biography because it's focusing on like a certain aspect of their life.
Right, yeah, mine's, it is an autobiography, but then at the same time, it's almost like an essay,
Yeah.
like a psychology essay. So Viktor Frankel was a psychologist who was a Jew during World War II, and he was in Auschwitz and all that stuff. And it's a super highly acclaimed book, obviously. It's for a lot of people, it's like a must-read. It's on Jordan Peterson's top whatever you should read. And mine was fairly short. Yours was super long. Yours was super long. I had the benefit of I read the physical copy, which I don't have with me anymore, actually, because I have a friend who's been going through some shit, and I was actually like, hey, you should read this, and I gave it to them.
I get a really bum you out.
Yeah. I read it, and then I listened to the audiobook, but it was only like 4 hours. I know yours was like 18 hours.
Yeah, 18 and a half, yeah.
It's insane. So, right off the bat, I think there's some misconceptions about the book.
About Sean Connery's misconceptions. We named the dog Indiana.
And Max was actually asking me about this early on, which it's worth asking. He was like, "Is it just one of those things where it's like, hey, the Holocaust happened, so you shouldn't feel bad about your problems?" You know, and it could easily be that kind of thing. And if it were, then I think it wouldn't be useful because, I mean, yeah, everyone has their own problems, and you can't sort of brush them off always by telling yourself, well, someone's had it worse. Like, you know, everything is in context.
Yeah.
And this isn't that at all. On one of our last podcasts, I sort of alluded to some of the major themes, and one of the big things that he mentions towards the end, I actually made the quote my Twitter bio because I liked it so much.
Very cool.
He said, "Decent people form a minority and always will remain a minority, but everything will become still worse unless each of us does his best." So that hit
With
me
a
a
picture
lot.
of Freaks and Geeks above it.
my banner is Freaks and Geeks.
That's beautiful.
I do have a very bizarre Twitter bio.
I like it. Emmett LaFave, far right extremist.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's something that it's a really dark truth to admit to yourself that most people are not that good, and it's hard to define that. I mean, it's not saying that everyone's fucking like, you know, Darth Sidious, but I think it's saying that most people at the end of the day are generally selfish, and a lot of people, when I mentioned that quote was taken from his book, people were like, well, yeah, he would think that because he was in the Holocaust, but he's not even referring to the Nazis. Like, of course, yes, the Nazis are bad people.
People just as a whole.
Yeah, he's really referring to the other prisoners.
Really?
He said that the best of us didn't make it out, and most people coming out of it became very bitter and hateful from their experiences. Yeah. And he said that it was a really beautiful message. Besides that, I mean, that's a very dark message, but it's also an important thing to contend with and to remember in your life.
You know what's crazy about the time that happened?
Yeah.
Is World War II ended in 1945, correct? So 10, 12 years later, they were having Little Richard and Elvis and Chuck Berry could go and get a milkshake.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's fucking crazy, dude. The time frame of things, that's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Like,
But, his larger point was that and it was a really beautiful point because we're both, like, pretty libertarian, I would say, and I value the ability to choose and just have free will a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. And he said that what the Holocaust did was it stripped a person of everything except their ability to choose. And he would say, well, how can they choose when they're like a prisoner? Well, a choice doesn't have to necessarily be like a physical action, but it can be a choice of character. Like, how do I want to behave in this situation?
Anyway,
and
think like, how do you want to frame it in your mind?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so he said that. Yeah, a lot of people didn't make it. A lot of people sort of chose death when they had the option of getting either super cigarettes. A lot of people would just get cigarettes so they could like party down one last night and then die. Which isn't, I don't know if death in itself is necessarily a selfish thing. I think some people think like suicide is sort of a selfish act, but and I could definitely see why. But it was more, especially for him, it was more coming out of it. He said there was one moment when him and a friend were wandering, and they had just sort of recently been freed, and they had come upon someone's crops, and his friend started like picking corn up and eating it, and Victor was like, yo, what are we doing? Those are someone's crops. And the friend was like, you know, after everything we've been through, why the fuck can I have someone's crops? You know? And to Victor that was like a big deal.
Was he starving and they like escaped, or
they had escaped, and I mean, the army was there, so they were in good hands.
Oh, okay.
And this dude was just like fucking with some random guy's crops anyway.
Oh.
And
had they had a meal in a while?
I mean, I'm sure they're super malnourished.
Okay, I'll give him a pass.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't think he's a terrible person, but even to
Under-
Victor, he was like, that's the wrong decision.
Well, he's got wild morals.
Yeah, he really does. But it's
I feel like in a Holocaust situation, I'll go on to like that. I'm like, have some corn.
yeah.
I almost feel like
I'm sure the farmer would have been okay with it.
Yeah,
but
I'll give him a pass.
Yeah, it's the principle of the thing for Victor, and that's definitely
quite the ironclad moral code.
Yeah, for real.
Good for him. That's impressive.
And yeah, it really is. And there was one moment. I think you guys should read it in full. I will say there's two parts to it. The majority of it is just his experiences in the different camps. And it's really well written in the sense it feels like you're watching a movie almost, because he doesn't. The one thing I hate about most books is that they waste your time. There's a lot of unnecessary shit in there, just straight up.
There's a lot of fluff to like, get a word count, I think.
And he's literally like, this happened, and this is why it's interesting. Jump to the next thing. This is why it's interesting. This is what happened. Jump. So it's like you're reading sort of scenes in a movie. You know, scene by scene. This happened. That's important. This happened. It's important. This. And then, like, he doesn't waste your time at all.
Yeah.
And then I was actually just reading. On Audible, you can look at reviews by star or whatever, and I was looking at the 1-star reviews just because it's such a highly acclaimed book.
Yeah.
Like, what do these people have to say?
See what they have to say.
And most of it were just like they couldn't even speak proper English and stuff. But there was one guy who I kind of agree with.
A 1-star one?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it merited 1 star, but I agree with what he said more or less. The beginning is his experiences, and they're very moving. And I guess this guy, Viktor Frankl, who's a psychotherapist, I guess technically. He developed.
And he was that before he went into the camp.
Yeah, which is cool. He developed his own sort of branch of psychiatry coming out of the camp.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah. And maybe
how to deal with heavy shit.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I mean, I think it could be an effective thing. It's called logotherapy.
Okay.
And how he describes it makes sense. And he's talks about how he's had success with patients and stuff. Excuse me. But so the second half, which is really only, I would say 1/3 to 1/4 of the end of the book, so it's a smaller section, but it takes a sharp left turn. Because in the beginning it was all these specific instances of things that happened in this camp, very moving, and he still talks about them through a psychologist's lens, and it's interesting. Okay. But the second half is basically him trying to sell you logotherapy. It's really weird.
That is
weird. Yeah, and it kind of like after all that stuff, it's like it's just weird.
Wow.
And I mean, I still read it, and there were still interesting parts. That quote that I read off that really stuck with me was from that second part.
Wow.
But even so, it's just like what like
the Jews know how to make a sale.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's interesting. But the other thing that really hit me was. Honestly, I can't remember if I read this from the book or if I just read this in an essay or something. But I had heard about how I had heard somewhere about how negative experiences we tend to block out, right?
Yeah.
And I think like everyone knows that, but it's not really something I I think about a lot.
Yeah.
And
I feel like it's almost one or the other. Like either it's like this crazy vivid memory that's like traumatic, or someone just like blanks stuff out.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I feel like Holocaust stuff, they probably blanked out a lot.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I was thinking, fucking Holocaust is like
Yeah.
the epitome of like that's gonna be this like one long haze.
Yeah.
And like I can't recall most of the stuff that happens in my life. I don't know if that means I'm depressed or not. I think it just means I have a bad memory. But yeah, Holocaust should be like you. By that principle, you shouldn't remember shit. But what's interesting for him is that he remembered so many specific things because he's a psychologist and because it was such an interesting look at human nature. And you can tell that through that lens, even though he was in this super disheveled, like about to die state constantly, he was still like, wow, this is interesting.
Yeah.
And he managed to remember all this and then write it down. I just, that in itself is very interesting. And there was one, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's such a crazy thing that I saw on the History Channel one time.
Yeah.
You see how horribly the Jews were treated when they were put in these concentration camps, and just how horrific it was. And then you look at when in World War II, the U.S. Captured some German POWs, and they had them here in the U.S.
Yeah.
and they treated them really nicely and gave them like tennis courts.
Right.
And like
right.
it's because they looked like the majority of Americans.
Very true.
So they treated them very
True.
nicely.
Yeah.
And in contrast to that, you just see how cool America was in World War II.
Yeah.
At least to the German POWs.
Yeah.
I don't know about the other ones. They probably treated them like shit. But that's a very weird contrast.
That is weird. Yeah.
It's a weird contrast. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, it's good. And if you're just looking for little bite-sized things that happen, like stories of things that happened in the Holocaust, it's really good for that. There's one sort of running bit about how the one thing he took with him when they first, were all loaded onto the trains and stuff was this giant essay he'd been writing, which was sort of his life's work, and it got taken away from him immediately, of course. So yeah, through the course of his time in the camps, he slowly rewrote the thing on like random scraps of paper and shit. So it's full of little things like that are just insane. And there's times where he'd like sneak an extra potato, and it was like the best moment of his life. And so it's like just this crazy shit. But one moment that really stuck with me, that just like it totally fucked me up, and it's towards the beginning, and it was the one part that really like brought me to tears, was when they were out in the cold on their way to like shovel something. They did a bunch of bullshit work. They just had to do random shit, right?
Dig a hole.
Yeah, exactly. They were out early morning in the cold, walking somewhere to dig a hole, and Victor Frankel was walking next to some other prisoner, and the prisoner, I guess, said, like, sort of jokingly, "If only our wives could see us now," because they're in such a fucked up state, I guess.
Yeah.
And that got Victor starting to just think about his wife in general, who obviously he didn't know if she was alive or dead at the time, and it turns out he pretty much lost everyone.
Jeez.
And he was the only one out.
She did die?
She died, yeah.
Right.
But he would basically just talk to her in his head. I mean, you're in such a crazy state there,
Yeah.
that you probably don't want to even register reality that much.
Yeah.
And so you get so deep into your head that just to pass the time, he would first of all sort of re-envision his wife's face. He said just like picturing her smile in his head made his day, and he would sort of in his mind he would reenact simple things like her turning off the light before bed and stuff, and he would just have like these fake conversations with her in his head, like he was just talking to her. And
It's very, very sweet and very sad.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that he loved her so much, and he said that if the world was good enough for someone as incredible and perfect as her to be in it, then it was good enough for him.
Wow.
And that's sort of one of the things that kept him going.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was so powerful.
Beautiful,
And,
beautiful perspective.
Yeah.
Especially for being in such a shit situation.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot to take from it, and in some ways it's people think it's not going to help you if you're depressed or whatever because it's so dark.
Yeah.
But that's sort of it's my thing when I talk about. That's my thing with music, which I've brought up. I don't know if I brought it up on the podcast, but where people sometimes think if you're sad you should listen to really happy music. But I've at least for me that's had the reverse effect. Where
Really?
if I'm in a shit mood and I try to listen to something happy, it's just gonna I'm not gonna vibe with it.
Yeah.
If I'm sad, I gotta like listen to something sad to kind of validate it and get it out.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I think that's definitely what this book did, because I mean, yeah, it's dark, and a lot of the takeaways are kind of dark, like the fact that most of the people in the world are indecent or whatever, as he puts it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when it forces you to look at those sort of darker realities, and it sort of walks you and helps you through it, and says like, this is shitty, but it's going to be okay. That's much more helpful than just sort of la-di-da, everything's great, sort of lying to you.
It's like a real comfort.
And one thing that I thought I was a genius for thinking about this, because this is my stupid like fucking forever 12-year-old brain.
I want to hear it.
I said, Batman is the perfect analogy. Because we both have the responsibility to choose our actions, and there are mostly bad people in the world. Yeah. So if Gotham is the world, and there are some good people, but most people are like the Joker and the Penguin, and then the good person is Batman. Batman is a peak moral figure whose standards never wane. Get it, Bruce Wayne?
Did you actually write that down?
I didn't mean for it to be a pun, but there's probably in my head.
It was a good pun. It was a good pun.
He's outnumbered by bad people, but he keeps choosing to do the right thing, not to kill, because they'll always be back anyway, and he always gives them a chance to turn themselves around, but he will never hesitate to lock them up again if they don't. So what my infantile mind got from this book is that we all need to be more like Batman. Hold on to the few things in this world that are good, keep them close to your heart because they're precious, and keep your guard up against injustice.
I think that would make Bob Kane and Bill Finger very happy.
Yeah.
The creators of Batman.
That's right. So very, very moving book altogether. I would say that you don't even... I mean, there are some interesting takeaways from the second half, but you can read just the first half as its own thing and be fine if you want to end it there. But
the second half you said is more the what was it called?
Logotherapy.
Logotherapy. My logotherapy.
There was in my notes here. There was one more, probably the most intense theme in the book. He said one really important thing is just it's about I don't know, just being a... Again, I guess this guy's standards are really fucking high. Like the corn, just not stealing the corn.
Yeah.
And
that blows my mind.
Yeah, he says one really important thing is accepting death with courage. Wow. Which is like, that's like the most hardcore thing in the world.
Yeah. I feel like having gone through what he went through, like you'd almost have to develop that. Either you'd still be scared of it, but have to accept its reality.
Yeah.
Or you have to be a pimp about it and just be like, you know what? No, it could happen tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I think he had like some post-war. He had some patient who was a kid at some point, and this kid developed some terminal disease, and the kid wrote to Viktor Frankl saying, "I think this is like fate giving me a chance to be heroic and like face death." So this fucking like little kid was like, "I'm gonna take this like a champ."
It offers you some serious perspective.
Yeah. Which is like, holy shit. So yeah, I mean, there's this whole section where he goes on and on about like how we need to be ready for death, we need to accept it, which is, and again, like, you know, in the Holocaust, it's all around you and it's normalized, and he
glaring.
said, he said just weeks in, like, people got to the point where they didn't give a shit. You know, you would see death constantly. He worked, even though he was a psychologist, they had him working as a medical doctor.
Okay.
So he was constantly, like, you know, helping patients, and there was just people fucking dying like every day. So we were just changing the battery out, and I literally, on one of our bookshelves, I found an additional copy of it. So here it is, Man's Search for Meaning.
Very fortuitous.
Yeah. Just as I was saying earlier, death was so prevalent in their time. There was one part where he's talking about how, you know, even though he was a psychologist, they had him working as a medical doctor, so he would tend to people who were like about to die, and he had nothing. There was nothing he could do, and he was, you know, he'd be talking to people, patients in their ward, which is probably like a shitty little hut, and then the next moment they'd be in this like pile of bodies, and their glazed eyes would be like looking at him, you know, some guy that he was just having a conversation with like 10 minutes ago.
Jeez.
And he said, like, you know, everyone just got used to that very quickly, which just juxtaposed with like the time in the society that we live in, where death is very like taboo, pushed under the curtains.
Yeah.
And so I mean, in a sense, it's easier for him to say, like, accept death with courage, because it was like literally an everything thing for him.
It was shoved in his face.
Where with us, it's like fucking terrifying. Like, you never think about it, you don't consider it.
Yeah.
You know, everything's so safe that So, but it is an important thing, and I mean that is like the ultimate fucking like manliness to be able to just look at death and be like, all right.
I feel like I should read that for perspective.
It's very good.
Yeah,
and you can take this copy if you want.
I have it.
It's free on Audible.
I have it in my Audible library. Yeah.
And I will say the Audible. We've been talking about our different Audible narrators.
Yeah.
I'm glad I read it first because the narrator for this book is really fucking pretentious. He sounds like Grand Moff Tarkin or something.
Sorry.
Like, oh, another patient of mine, and I'm like, dude, shut the fuck up. So like,
very into his
yeah.
performance.
So like the content's good, but just take the narrator with a grain of salt because he's super pretentious.
All right. Yeah, my narrator, the guy's name was Mike Pritchard, and at first. The first like 2 chapters, I thought, "Oh, this is going to be tedious. This is going to be boring."
You showed me a little of him,
and then he started stepping it up. He kind of got into a groove, and I kind of got used to him and started liking his voice.
Beautiful. And
he started, I don't know, like I think he must have watched a lot of the interviews with Richard Kuklinski, who was the main character of my book, which I'll get into, because he started kind of embodying that vibe. Mm-hmm. And he was like, you listen to him, you're like, oh, he sounds kind of menacing.
Yeah.
But anyway. Man,
your book. Let's do it. Yeah, this is insane.
Oh, look what happens to be on the bookshelf here.
Oh, man.
This is The Iceman: Confessions of a Mafia Contract Killer. Highly freaking recommend, guys. One of the best books I've ever read or listened to on Audible. I listened to it on Audible, and I liked it so much I got a hard copy afterwards because. This is one that's meant to be shared. Like, this is like a really, really freaking good, fantastic book. New York Times bestseller. Philip Carlo is the name of the, not narrator, the author. Shout out to Philip Carlo. And so let's get into it. Basically, it's about this man named Richard Kuklinski, who was a contract killer for a whole bunch of the different mafia families back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s. And he had a really fucked up childhood that led him to be this psychotic killer. His father was this abusive, horrible man who beat the fuck out of him and his brother, and actually ended up knocking his brother down and hitting his head and killing his brother as a child. So he killed his older brother. I think it was his older brother. He actually killed the father killed him, and. It was really horrific, and the guy would beat the mother, and he was just an absolute monster. So this obviously affected Richard Kuklinski, the main character, as a boy, and he would also get the shit beaten out of him by the nuns, and he ran into some creepy situation with priests at his Catholic school.
So it was all normal to him growing up.
Yeah. All bad stuff was all he knew, and literally he would leave in the morning and see his dead brother's picture every morning, and then go to Catholic school and get whipped by the nuns. And then he said like a priest one time tried to make a move on him, and he got out of there because he knew it was not good, even though he was only 8.
Jesus.
He knew it was uncomfortable. But this kid went through some horrible fucking shit, and I'm not saying that it's justified what he did, but you can at least see how someone going through such a horrible upbringing would become a monster. He ended up having another brother, a younger brother, who lived, and that brother as well also grew up to be a rapist and a killer, and he ended up in jail. His brother ended up killing a 12-year-old girl and raping her, and also taking her dog and throwing it off a roof and killing it. So we're talking fucking monsters.
God, yeah.
So let's get back to Richard though. Richard Kuklinski, the main character. He went through some serious shit, and he did his first murder, he said, when he was 13 years old. There was a group of boys in their neighborhood who would beat him up and bully him, profusely. They were relentless. They would just beat the hell out of him. And the kid was a pretty big kid. He was a couple years older than him. And one night, Richard, after having an encounter with his dad and being really pissed off, went out into the cold, and he got a lead pipe, and he waited for this kid to come home. And he just beat the fuck out of him. And Richard wasn't planning to kill him. He just wanted to teach him a lesson, but he ended up cracking the kid's head open and killing him. And this is how hardcore this guy was. At age 13, he dragged the body, stole a car. He knew how to steal cars. He drove out into the country and went to a bridge over a river that was frozen. I kid you not. Read the book. he read crime comic books, like true crime comic books, and that's how he like learned how to do a bunch of stuff.
He thought he was Grand Theft Auto.
He thought he was, yes. And this, I think this would have taken place. He would have been that age, like late 50s, early 60s, something like that. But
that's how we had the knowledge.
Yes, that's how he had the knowledge from the comic books to do this shit. But he ended up cutting off the kid's fingers that he killed, getting a hammer and bashing all his teeth out so they couldn't identify him from his dental records,
Shit.
lugging him up and dropping him through the ice into the river, and the body was never found.
Very methodical for an intense,
Yeah.
like beyond tense situation as a 13-year-old.
It's fucking
That's crazy. Yeah,
great. It's this kind of stuff where I read it and I'm like, is this real?
Yeah.
But he was a real guy.
Truth is stranger than fiction.
He was a real guy. Anyway, but it only got crazier from there. So obviously, as he grew older, it seemed like there was a period of normalcy, like his teenage years, like despite his parents being terrible people. Even his mom, they said, was mean, and she'd like beat him with a broom and shit. And like he said, he ended up hating his mother like by the time he was like a teenager. So really, really sad stuff. And you see why he and his brother became so fucked up. But I don't want to give away every single detail, but I want to tell you a lot about it in case you want to read it yourself. But I'm going to proceed to tell you the whole story now. Well, it's hard not to, man. It's hard not to, but I'll tell you the highlights.
There are book reviews.
They are book reviews,
Reports, whatever.
So if anything I said interests you, you can, skip
There's
it,
a
skip
lot
ahead.
in there. I mean, 14 hours in the audiobook. This
is a beast of a book.
Yeah, so.
And then also, if you enjoy the book, there's also an HBO special they did on Richard Kuklinski and interviews and his confessions and everything straight from his mouth. Like they actually have recordings of him. So check that out if you are interested. But anyway, so from there, once he got into his 20s, he started getting like this real volatile temper, like to the point where someone would look at him wrong. He'd go like at a bar, he'd go in a bathroom and like slit their throat. Like he became like American Psycho. Like he was, and also he was huge. Like he was like something like 6'6" or 6'5", and he was like gigantic. There's literally a part where they're trying to take him down. It took 8 guys to take him down. Like he's like, so think of like the most gigantic guy you can imagine, and he's a horrifying homicidal maniac.
Jesus.
So he's like, Richard Kuklinski was a scary dude. But he could also be nice, and he could also be charming, and he was able to get a wife and have kids, and he said he was really smooth with the ladies. Actually, they said he would like go and like he could like meet chicks like super easily.
Tall, dark, and handsome.
They said when he was in his 20s, he was a very good looking man.
Wow.
They said so that kind of like.
I imagine him being stoic and stuff. Women like that.
He was very fucking stoic. Yeah. One thing about him though is he refused to ever hurt women or children.
Okay, yeah, some morals, I guess.
Yeah, he would never kill them. He beat the shit out of his wife.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Unfortunately, Barbara Kuklinski.
Barbara.
Let's see if there's a picture of him here. As he got older, he was not good looking, but like there was him when he was young.
Oh man, yeah, he's gargantuan.
Yeah,
terrifying.
Yeah. So in his 20s, Richard Kuklinski ended up getting involved with the Mafia. I don't remember exactly how he met the first mobster. I don't know if it was through a friend. I actually don't remember, to be honest with you. All I remember are the kills. But anyway, somehow he ended up inadvertently getting involved with the Mafia, and he liked it. He liked the idea of being a contract killer.
Yeah, you get paid to do what he apparently liked anyway.
Yeah, so he already enjoyed killing people, and he had quite a few, like, I don't know exactly, let's say like 8 or 10 under his belt. So it was like nothing new to him, really. And then he realized he could make serious money. We're talking like in like 1960s, 1970s money, like, $50,000, $60,000 a hit. And this is something he enjoyed doing. It was like he never really came out and said he enjoyed killing, but he said that it was a way to relieve stress for him. So he said if he was really wound up and he killed someone, he said it was like a release.
Sounds like an addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. And so basically he got involved with the Mafia, and he, since he was Polish, he could never become a made man with one family because he wasn't Sicilian or Italian. So he was a free agent, and they were okay with that because he wasn't, technically one of them. So he could go to all these different families, and he actually worked with the family that the Sopranos were based on in real life. He worked with that family a lot, and he killed a shit ton of people, and he had so many different crazy ways of disposing of the bodies. He found a cave that had all these rats in it, and he found that the rats would eat the people, and he'd put them in there. And then if the people who arranged the hit wanted to see them suffer, he'd set up a camera and record them being tortured and being eaten alive. There was another farmer who wouldn't give up information on a stolen truck of goods, like a stolen semi, and they like strung the guy up, and he like burnt his balls off with a lighter, and ended up killing the guy. Like, we're talking like fucking horrific shit. Yeah, so he was a total maniac, and he ended up becoming one of the most notorious hitmen, I would say, of all time, to at least get caught.
Yeah.
And they said his body count, when they asked him of how many people he thought he killed, he said it was probably over 150, but less than 200.
Oh my god.
So we're talking like, who knows, maybe like 170 people, something like that.
God.
He killed a shit ton of people. And a crazy thing about Richard Kuklinski is once he started getting into it and really getting serious jobs with the Mafia, he would go into Manhattan and he would kill homeless people for practice. So he would go in and he'd work on different techniques to be a better hitman. So he'd work on, using an ice pick or using a knife or using a gun and doing it quickly and swiftly and clean. And he would do it for sport, and he would kill, I don't know how many homeless people just for the heck of it, just because he needed practice.
Good lord, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't want to tell you the ending, but I will tell you that this was one of the craziest books I've ever read, and the fact that it's non-fiction blows my mind. Right. And the fact that you can go on YouTube and look up Richard Kuklinski and hear him tell stories is absolutely insane.
Terrifying. Yeah, you were saying like it makes American Psycho look like nothing.
Yeah, if you've ever read American Psycho, which is, thank God, fictional, freaking amazing book. Like I said, one of my favorite authors, Bret Easton Ellis. That book is so graphic. Like, that book is so graphically violent, it like turns your stomach. And that is like a little walk in the park compared to this.
God damn.
Like, this one you read it, and like I said, I'm not even really deep into like true crime. You know how like so many girls are into true crime and the mind of murderers? I don't really get into that kind of stuff. I think a lot of it's very disturbing, but this one is such a compelling story, and the whole Mafia connection and the whole, cops trying to take him down connection, and the whole, just his whole attitude towards life and how crazy he is. You almost kind of, I hate to say it, but you kind of like look forward to the murders, almost like watching Dexter. Like, where it's like you kind of, in a sick way, even though he's fucked up, you kind of root for him. Yeah, because you get to know him so well, and you know his upbringing and everything. He becomes the main character, so you want him to succeed and get away. And it kind of gets to a point where you're like, oh, how's he going to kill the next one? And like he gets really into poisons, and like he's super up on like cyanide and stuff like that. And after a certain point, the kills in the book, in a sick way, kind of become entertaining.
Yeah, well, I mean, I get the fascination with like slashers and stuff, because I could never even begin to imagine stuff like that.
I want to like read next.
But this really happened, so it's even more like, it's not just like, ooh, that's an interesting way to kill someone. It's like, what the fuck, someone actually did this. Yeah, and that in itself is just like, that blows my mind. It's chilling. Yeah, this is why they called me Iceman.
Yeah, there was another part where they took guys out on a boat and, waited for sharks so they can dispose of the body.
Good Lord.
Like, these guys were like, and dude, what's crazy is how fucked up Richard Kuklinski was as a killer. He said that the guys in the Mafia were the most twisted people he'd ever met in his life. And he said that they were so sadistic and they were so almost like turned on by the suffering of these guys, that he said they were like the most messed up guys he'd ever met in his life. And
they were messed up to him.
And that's coming from like the most prolific killer of like the last 100 years.
What the fuck?
So like he said those guys were so fucked up. Ugh. He said there'd be ones. Here's one more story. I don't want to give it too much away, but I want to review it. There was one mobster that he worked for who was really hardcore, and he said he wanted to. It was something like I think with infidelity or something like that. But he wanted to have Richard go and kill this guy, and he went and killed this guy, and he said, "Bring back his head for me." So Richard sawed off his head, brought the head back in a bag, and put it out for him. And he said the Mafia guy started laughing and clapping and hugged him and went and put it in his freezer and said he was going to save it to show all his buddies on poker night.
Oh my God.
And so he kept a goddamn head in his freezer.
That's like, yeah, like I always thought the Godfather shit growing up was a little contrived, but I guess it's right on the
Right on the nose.
Holy shit!
But all I can say is, even if you're not a huge fan of true crime stuff, seriously one of the best books I've ever read in my life. And I like raved about it. I told you about it, how into it I was.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds sick, and it is. But at the same time, like if you like Dexter or The Sopranos, or even like, I would even say like Breaking Bad, like check out The Iceman. It's so good.
In a way, our books make you have the same reaction.
Yeah.
You're like, you can't believe this really happened.
It turns your stomach.
Yeah,
There were a few points where like if I was eating, I'd be like, I can't.
Yeah, right.
I couldn't eat and listen to the audiobook. Like,
Man.
it was
Oh, God.
But I highly recommend it. This one for me, literally, like I said again, Philip Carlo, Confessions of a Mafia Contract Killer, The Iceman. We'll have links to both our books below. But seriously, a 5 out of 5 for me. Like one of the best things I've ever read in my life so far. And for once when it says New York Times bestseller, I'm like, I see why.
Everything's a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, every book, or it's Oprah's book club.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't think Oprah would approve of this one. But,
oh, man.
Anyway, but really good. And if you guys like this series, we'll do it again in a couple months because it is rarely reading. So
it's gotta be rare.
Yeah, we don't do it all the time. It's actually a real struggle to get through a book, but this one, super freaking interesting, so much less of a struggle than your average book.
Yeah, you gotta find the one that's not a chore to read, and then once you found that, you're good to go.
That's the key.
It does take some looking to find those good ones.
Yeah. But this one gets like I said, A+ from me.
Awesome. I'll have to check it out.
Awesome, guys. And thanks. If you have any book suggestions, feel free to put them down. In the comments. I don't know if we'd actually read them, but if you have a compelling enough comment, maybe we'll check it out.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, guys. Remain unfazed, and maybe we'll read another book in the near future.
Take care.
Bye.
Got everything you need. There's plenty to do, or you could just sit and read. This book explains how to make paper planes. This contour map can show you mountain range terrains.
Fly to the moon, explore the ocean floor. Find out which one's a killer and which one is the art.
Here's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and half magic. Hop on top, lots of sauce, and books and doing card tricks. Ooh! Having fun isn't hard when you've got a library card. That's right. Having fun isn't hard. You've got a library card. Books on baseball, hockey, and soccer.
And even how to build yourself a cool door knocker.
I could stay in this place for hours and hours. I like books with pictures of lots of pretty flowers. Being crushed by a giant pterodactyl. Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and Ray Bradbury. You can take them home so you don't have to read them